Welcome to our grant-focused webinar with Abby Zachritz. Today, we're just going to be talking about what grants are, how you can utilize them within the orthopedic realm, and Abby's just going to give us all her information about what she does and how she kind of came into the role that she currently is in. So let's just jump in with Abby. Why don't you just introduce yourself and kind of give us a little bit of your background story?
Well, thanks for having me, Maureen. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Abby Zachritz. People on Instagram and other social platforms know me as Advocacy Abby. I have five kids and one child with a disability. And several years ago, I started sharing through different platforms, grants and resources and education. And now it's kind of evolved into me posting really often grants that can help all kinds of kiddos and all kinds of diagnosis and abilities. And so, yeah, I've started sharing that on social out to the public, and we've seen a great response and a great need recently. I couldn't believe how many families had never qualified for a grant or had never found one with their diagnosis or their maybe their income level, something they would qualify for. So it's been a pleasant journey so far.
Yeah, I think about the word grant and it just makes me feel like I already don't know what that is, or it seems like such a heavy lift, even just that word, right? Because you
Yeah.
hear about grants in all different types of settings. You're like, grants for non-profit organizations and all of these things, but I'm like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So I feel like there is such that need, especially in a parent role, because we're not versed in this. We haven't had experience doing this until you have to do it, right? And
Right.
so I think the services and information that you're providing to parents is just so invaluable because it just helps them figure out where they're even supposed to begin, which like I think in life is always the hardest part. Is like just beginning, right?
Right. Yeah, we actually, when I first heard the word grant, it was way before I personally used one. I'm near the University of Florida, and most the doctors and PhDs I knew were always applying for grants. So I always looked at it as something businesses or
Yeah.
not for profits got, not something individuals got. And so
Mhm.
when my son had his diagnosis and we were actually first offered a grant, didn't research it. A friend told a friend and they reached out to us. And then I realized there's this whole world of
Mhm.
organizations and foundations that wanted to give financially to cover things like braces, formulas, medical stays, flights, trips, respite care, all kinds of things. It just opened a huge door for our family.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's that misconception that if you've worked in a business setting that you think that it's only for companies. And so I'm sure part of what you're doing is just educating parents about the fact that there is personalized grants for people that aren't related to an organization. But navigating that process can be tricky.
It
So why don't
can.
we just start with like the basics, okay? What is a grant?
Okay, so a grant is a specified amount of money that an organization will give to, and they typically, most organizations, when I'm speaking of grants, I'm speaking of foundation to family. Most of them will give it directly to the provider that of the service or equipment or therapy that you're needing. And so some of them will sometimes do more scholarship or gives versus grants where they like give a piece of equipment or they will cover a stay at a particular place. But a lot of them will make it a little more custom. They'll say, we have a grant of $2,500 if you qualify. And so you apply kind of like a scholarship. You apply and then they will cut that check or whatever their method is, send that money to the provider to cover your needs. And so there's different stipulations with every single foundation. Most of these foundations aren't huge organizations. They're moms and dads and caregivers and grandparents and people that saw a need in their own family and kind of made beauty out of ashes. They went through something either tragic or they embraced a diagnosis in a really wonderful way and they saw a need and they filled that need. And so they're usually typically not for profit, sometimes individuals that just have the resources and they want to give.
Okay.
But they do
So,
have particular criteria, and you can almost
mhm.
always find those details on their websites.
Okay. So if you were wanting to apply for a grant
Mhm.
and you, how would you even go about starting that
Yeah.
process?
So first, you're going to need to find a grant that fits your criteria. And so when you go into, let's say, you go to Google and you're searching, I would search grants for children with disabilities or children with cerebral palsy or children with club feet or whatever the diagnosis is, because you want to get more specific. But if you're not finding them, especially if you're very specific, broaden that range. You could say grants for AFOs, grants for orthotics, organizations that give grants. Change your terminology, and you're more likely to stumble upon after digging. And that's one of the things I actually teach in one of my courses is ways to dig, because sometimes when we go through and we're not finding it. If it was as easy as just putting in grant for this and all these grants just popped out, everybody would do it. You do have to dig a little bit. But before you even go to Google, I always recommend talking to the company or to the parent advocate of the company that you're getting your service from. So let's say you want to go to intensive therapy and there's this great, let's say Napa Center or Ability Plus Therapy down in Melbourne, Florida. I would ask them, hey, are there any organizations that you have received grants for your patients that maybe I could apply for? I can't tell you how many times I've been given an entire list from these organizations, and then you just go through and kind of discern which ones apply for you and which ones don't.
Okay. So let's say you find something that you think is meets your criteria, right? So the grant's going to meet your criteria. Is it always the same process when you are applying for a grant, or is it different for everyone? Is what I'm assuming.
It's different for everyone,
Yeah.
but there are generalities in almost all of
Okay.
them.
Yeah.
So a lot of them are income based, but not all of them. All
Mm-hmm.
of them, you have to have proof of diagnosis. I've not
Okay.
found one, maybe unless you know the founder yourself. I have come across that personally, but they actually were in my house.
Yeah.
um, so if you have to have proof of diagnosis, if it's for equipment or a treatment, you'll need a letter of medical necessity and lots of other little things that will help you maybe stand out a little bit. I always recommend getting a really good picture of your kid, if it's
Mhm.
using a device, or I would get them in the device trialing it, or if maybe it's a like maybe it's for orthotics. So like maybe you should take a picture of their feet plus their smiling face and you send that in and you show them that there's a need and maybe my deductible is too high and you explain your situation. And that's when they go, okay, we see the need, we'll fill the need.
Okay. So I have so many like questions about just if you're in the process and you're like, so you've identified it, you have the criteria, you kind of gathered your material, which it sounds like
Mhm.
you have there's similar things that you need for all of them. So it's not like you're reinventing the wheel for every
Right,
single grant application,
right.
even though there is slight differences between them, right? You kind of
Mhm.
have a base foundation of what you need for every grant, and
Mhm.
then you apply. So what
Mhm.
happens from that process? Like you apply and then you wait, or what happens with that?
Yeah, you apply and wait. And so
Okay.
that's where you really want to comb through. It's good to not bog down foundations with unnecessary emails. So if
Mhm.
you're able to comb through their FAQs, to comb through their application, to make sure you're not missing an answer they already answered, I would always recommend that first. You don't want to aggravate the people you're about to ask for a grant from, and they get so many emails every single day. And so I would comb through everything and they will typically say, hey, we're like a lot of times they have boards, right? Because a lot of them are not for profits and they'll vote on who gets the grant. And so you would ask them, so what's your process of, if I'm approved or if I'm denied? That's a really good question. So if you can't find that information, I would email them, say, hey, I just applied. This is my name. This is my information. Please let me know if I'm missing anything. And what is the process for approval and denial? And this is, once again, all these kind of things I like to go over in my course. So I go into much detail because these are the things that make or break somebody getting a grant.
Got you.
I'll give you an example. Last night I just did I'm doing one-on-one coaching with a client and I'm walking her through getting some grants. I sent her a ton of grants to apply for. She applied. She hadn't heard back from like 5 of them. I reached out to the foundation last night. They said she was missing several questions and some documentation. She said, I never saw those. I didn't even see those when I applied. There must have been some kind of glitch in what she was looking on her computer. I quickly submitted them. They're voting today. So had we never reached out, which probably 98% of people don't, that they would have been denied. And they don't always have time to tell everybody that are denied. They just sometimes will call up the people that have been approved. And so then you'll be waiting and hoping, and you could have moved on because they denied you, or you could give them what they need so they have a better chance of approving you.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think there's so much of that where you're constantly waiting and you're not knowing. And I think that's one of the pieces with parenting and caregiver role is like, it's hard to know when you need to follow up and when you don't. Like, you don't want to be excessive, like you said, in your follow-ups, but you also are like, especially if you're new to the process, it's great to have that more one-on-one coaching to go like, hey, these are the things that I need. These are the things that you need to do. It's almost like setting up the foundation for you to then figure out how to have that success on your own, right?
Listen, I specialize in grants, and I recently was getting a device for my son. So I have a son who has quadriplegic spasticity. He uses a wheelchair. He's non-ambulatory. So he has lots of devices and supports, from AFOs to wheelchair to braces for his hands. He has all the things. And I really wanted this. It's a stroller, but it's for bigger people. And it's very multi. You can hook it up to bikes. You can go sledding in it. I mean, it's just the coolest thing ever. Obviously very expensive because anything with that label is a pretty price tag. And so we had gotten some money raised for this device, which is another thing. I specialize in fundraising, and that can be a very, very, it's a really great way to find support for larger ticket items, especially because grants sometimes they'll be really big, but sometimes you need more because the medical treatment or something is much larger. But then I kind of was like, oh man, I only fundraised so much. And I was overwhelmed by it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is what I do. Get out there and go get a grant. And so I worked on that for about a week and we got it covered. And so I was like, yeah, I get it. As a parent, you have so much going on. So that is where somebody coming along and holding you accountable, because you can say, I'm going to do that. And then 45 things line up ahead of you. And you're just like, the last thing I have is, an hour to sit down and fill out this application. But when you have somebody kind of breaking it down in small portions for you, encouraging you, doing the follow-up, it does help a lot.
And I think another piece that I know just from even following you on Instagram is that there's the constant rotation of grants of like what's available now, which was no longer available, like that constant flux. It's not like an insurance company that's always there, that's always going to be, a very prescribed plan. And so I think that process of searching and knowing whether it's even still available or is a whole nother hurdle that parents would struggle with.
Yeah, you can spend hours, and then you finally find the perfect grant, and you go through all the process and you get to the end and it says no longer receiving applications, or see you in November at our next voting date, and then it can be very discouraging and it is hard. And so I actually keep what I call a living, breathing document of all the grants and foundations that I found through all kinds of organizations. And I try to keep that as updated as possible, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone somewhere and I look through 10 different foundations and 7 of 10 are no longer even in business, much less giving grants. So it can be hard, it can be defeating, but that's where you find support like myself or you, where people come in organizations and they're for the parent, they help navigate those waters. It makes it a little bit easier. We have tough lives already.
Yeah.
Those easy connections that can be made, I think, just make everything a little smoother.
Yeah, and I think that support is just such an important piece of it. And I think parents don't even know where to start a lot of the time
Yeah.
to even look for or ask for that support.
Yeah.
It's enough to just be overwhelmed in your caregiver role. And like you said, if you have an hour of time, it's like,
Mhm.
what are you gonna spend your time doing? Continuing in that caregiver capacity and like spending all of your time researching? Or are you gonna take, a few minutes for yourself for respite, right? Like,
Right.
and trying to constantly be in flux with that as a caregiver, I think it's hard to navigate that up front, right? So the more
Right.
ways that you can find support in the avenues that you don't know about, right? That is so beneficial for parents.
Yeah, and you also have to give yourself grace to look for a grant. I have found even with
Hmm.
myself being like, there's probably someone that needs it more than me, and
Hmm.
then I don't do it. But what we don't realize is these grants, they're open for a reason. They do want to help you, even if you
Hmm.
feel like you might not be as in need as someone else. They'll tell you that. Let them
Hmm.
tell you that, you know.
Yeah.
And so shifting your mindset and saying, okay, I know, let's say you're middle class and you can afford your bills, but it does
Hmm.
put a stress on you. You don't get to take that vacation that you need. You don't get to enter
Hmm.
into the, you know, basketball tournament you wanted to for your kid. And if you
Yeah.
could get those orthotics covered, it might allow for that to happen. And so if you just allow the foundations to do what they need to do, which is decide on who
Hmm.
should receive these things, and you just do your best on
Hmm.
getting these things covered, getting that support, because you know what, most people don't have to make these choices, and so if we can make something a little easier for a family that is going through a unique circumstance, that's what we want to do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good point because I do think that becomes a big piece of it with parents of like, well, there's somebody who needs this more than me, or I can afford this. But the reality is, even if you can afford to pay your regular bills, there is so much more extraneous cost involved
Yeah.
when you are in that capacity, just for equipment, like I mean, all of it costs money. And so that piece and that money can be utilized for other things for your family. And so there is a cost benefit that I think
Right.
parents don't, but that doesn't always logically make sense because your emotional attachment to, I don't know if I need this as much as the next person
Right.
can sometimes take over that piece. But it's like, but you are deserving of what you need for your family as well.
Right. Yeah. And that's where just bringing it full circle, like letting the foundations discern that I mean,
Mhm.
they'll see, they're going to have all the applications, and you never know, there are foundations that sometimes don't have any applications. Nobody
Yeah.
applied that semester or that
Mhm.
month, and so you might be the only one, and they say we have to give money. I've had a physical therapist reach out to me and said, do you know anybody that needs intensives? Because this organization asked me, does anybody need intensives? Because nobody applied and we want to give one away.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so you don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
so apply, go for it. If they tell you no and why, you'll figure it out. And you'll figure out which ones to keep applying for, which ones not to. And
Mhm.
yeah, and the process will become smoother and smoother over time.
Yeah. So let's like, would you be willing to do kind of an example grant of like what you would walk through in searching for like a national grant? So let's say you're like looking for something. Where do you start? Like, what's your first step? So you said Googling, right?
Yeah, I would go to my page.
Okay.
If
Yeah.
I knew about Advocacy Abby and I wasn't Abby, I would
Yeah.
go to my page and I would go to Reels on Instagram. Um,
Okay.
I have posted and I continue to post, and I still have a long list that I'm going to continue to post of
Mm-hmm.
foundations and grants. And if you go to the caption section of each reel, it says the name of the foundation, who it's for, where they give, because that's huge. You don't want to spend your time applying for a grant that only
Mm-hmm.
gives to Ohio and you live in Florida. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll say nationwide, international, North America, or it'll say Toledo. you know,
Okay.
and so you don't have to waste your time looking for that information. It's already there. And then it'll say who they give to. And this is important. So when you're looking at a grant, let's say you do a Google and you say grants for children with disabilities, and up pops Live Like Jake Foundation. Okay, so one of the biggest things you'll want to know about them is they give grants to children that have had near drownings. So if that pops up and you see cover therapy equipment, stuff like that, but you didn't have a near drowning, you're going to want to just move on. Another one, and it's you really want to look for the verbiage detail. I just posted one like 2 days ago called the June and Jesse Foundation. They give specifically to children that have undiagnosed neurological disorder. Had I not seen the undiagnosed part, I, as a mom of a child with a anoxic brain injury, would have applied. But my son is diagnosed. We know exactly what caused it. And so I think looking for those cues as you're going through them, but as you start to dig and you're searching, just rewording, rephrasing is a huge thing on Google. A lot of people will be SEO smart on their websites, and so they're gonna think about how they would say it about their child. Like, so if you're looking for a grant for a child with cerebral palsy that covers a piece of equipment, I would say foundations. And the reason I go to foundations because foundation is almost in all their titles. Foundations and grants for child with cerebral palsy. And then I would use therapy, equipment, bracing, respite, whatever I'm looking for. Because sometimes if you leave it too broad, you're going to get any page that has ever mentioned grant, and a lot of them don't give grants. They just might be suggesting you should find a grant for these things. And so the more specific you can get as you go, the better. And then start digging. Don't just, if you find one that maybe it's closed, scroll down. Sometimes websites have other resources. They'll have a resources tab. Like a lot of times doctor's offices will have a resources tab. Sorry, not doctor's offices, medical providers. So like OP or let me think of some others, like different therapy centers will have a place where it'll say resources, and sometimes it'll say foundations and grants. And so when they have that, those are typically specific for what they offer. And so don't just stop at Google, look into what you're looking for. And if they don't have one, ask them. Say, hey, do you guys have any grants or foundations you've received money from to cover XYZ before? That's one of the best questions you could ask, or ask your therapist. Have you helped? I can't tell my therapist, actually, I asked her once, I was like, I need another foundation. She listed off like 3 right away. And I was like, why have you never told me? Well, she's not thinking about it all day. She's thinking about helping kids, physically recover. And so when I asked her, she knew right away, and they were very helpful. And so, and advocate for those things. Like go to the people that are providing the service and say, hey, I need help. Is there someone or something you can point me to? And a lot of times they will know someone, or they'll have a parent advocate that maybe you haven't heard about yet. So that's a really helpful way to find some grants you're looking for.
And that's such a good point. I think it's about knowing the questions to ask and where to go to ask them. It's like you can't assume that people know what you are exactly looking for, but as parents, sometimes we don't even know what it is that we're looking for. So then but if you start just asking those questions of like, hey, would you know this? Or, it can be a vulnerable place to start because you're asking for help. And sometimes that's hard for caregiver parents, right? In certain scenarios, we already need so much help in so many different avenues. But I think if you just start with the basics of like, who are the people involved in my child's care that then would maybe have some information about this that then I could ask? Those are safe, trusting people that I know will be open to communicating with me, and they can be resources, right?
Right. And if you have like a diagnosis that you received at birth, like let's say your child's born, or you knew maybe in utero that your child was going to have XYZ, talking to the social worker, there are so many foundations that will only work with the social worker at the hospital. So you're going to need to get applied for that while you're there.
Mhm.
Sometimes those are covering medical bills, covering extenuating circumstances, surgeries, but they're worth it. So make sure you ask the social worker at the hospital too, if you are in that stage of life where either you're at the hospital a lot or you're about to have a child that you know you're going to have to, look for medical care.
Yeah, I that's a really good tip too. I think it's utilizing the resources that hospitals have that you may not even know about. Like I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been in a hospital setting where I'm like, "Oh, you have this service that I never even knew about." Like that would have been really helpful, right?
Right.
But it's also like the hospital is not always communicating all of those services in a way that is applicable to you. So
Right.
that's what I learned is it's not as though the hospital doesn't care about my experience or that they don't have those resources available. I'm just not getting that information in a way that I'm receiving it. And so
Right.
being able to say, "Hey, this is what I'm looking for. Do you have this?" Then they can start to point you in the direction of where that needs to go.
Right. Yeah. And that's where, and not to keep coming back to my course, but like that's the stuff we're teaching is because you just don't know what you don't know. Like you would never
Yeah.
have thought to ask certain questions to your insurance company. You would never have thought you would never think that I just posted a reel today that covers mini vacays for moms of children with disabilities because they spend all their money on their kids.
Hmm.
That covers that. So like you wouldn't think to look for a grant to cover a getaway for you, but it might
Yeah.
be 100% the thing you need to be the best mom you can be. And so
Hmm.
um, yeah, finding people, parent advocates at organizations that you're looking into or getting services from, myself on Instagram and other people like me, looking there, getting in communities too, because people talk a lot. Um,
Yeah.
and so, like, if you're in a community for your diagnosis or just maybe for, medically complex or, really broad ones too, because sometimes that's where you find broad grants is, oh, this one place covers this.
Hmm.
And so they might cover, a lot of my grants actually are just diagnosis. You have to have some kind of diagnosis that requires you to need this piece of equipment or this kind of treatment.
Yeah. That makes sense. So what is it that let's talk a little bit about your role with Aura. So Aura Medical is a company that orthopediatric specialty bracing is a distributor for their Levity device, which we've created other content and other information about. So if you want to know more specifics about that device, then you can go on to the OPSB website and there's lots of information on there or the Aura Medical website. But how did you connect with Aura and how are you working with the families that are looking to get access to that device?
Yeah. So I love the company Aura. Let me just tell you, because they are very client oriented. They really care about the customer.
Hmm.
I was actually being interviewed by two physical therapists on social media, and those therapists were asking me questions about advocacy Abbey grants, things like that. And one of Aura's sales reps just happened to stumble upon the interview, and she direct messaged me and was just like, hey, and she was just wanting to know about how to find grants for her clients because she cared. And that's the kind of companies I work with, companies that care. But she reached out to me, and one thing led to another. She introduced me to Sarah, one of the founders of the Levity,
Hmm.
and they proposed that they are a company that's really focused on, and I'm telling you this, but I want others to know too, that they're
Yeah.
really focused on the client. Like they want to
Hmm.
see tons and tons and tons of kids helped. And this
Hmm.
gait trainer, this walker can do this. And it was really unique too. I really was drawn to the device itself, to be honest, because I see kids use gait trainers all the time and they always have to have their hands down to walk. Now they might be able to stop and lift up a little bit, but typically speaking, to keep their balance, I mean, there's a reason they need a walker. And
Hmm.
so when I saw that the gait trainer was giving kids freedom to use their arms I saw a video of a little girl dancing and doing ballet moves. I saw a little boy playing tennis.
Hmm.
Those are the things that I said, okay, that's life changing for somebody. Plus, medically speaking, letting them stay in the walker for longer time periods, helping strengthen their legs, helping them meet their goals faster. I just thought it's a company I want to be a part of. And so they have hired me to partner with them, or contracted me to partner with them to work with their clients. And so they basically just said, we want you to help anybody that needs help that's trying
Mhm,
to get a Levity. And so to me, that's a no-brainer. I believe in the device, I believe in the
mhm,
company, and I
mhm,
definitely believe in the kids. And so I'm working with their parents that need that support, and we're
mhm,
finding grants and foundations to cover sometimes the whole thing, sometimes partial. Sometimes
mhm.
parents says, I can do this amount, but I need the remainder cover. And that's when they'll contract me in and bring me into the fold.
So, yeah, so it's more like some individual
Yeah.
help it once people need it to
Yeah.
identify it. And I will second that everything that you said about Aura. And for people who don't know, they really are a company that really cares about the end user, that the patient, parent, physical therapist, they created that device with everybody in mind. And that's such a unique thing, I think,
Yeah.
in this sort of industry. And so, but there is that piece where, and they actually care about their parents' experience of how can they get access to the device, because
Mhm.
sometimes that's what feels like for parents. I can imagine you're like, I know that this would be really great for my kid. I don't have any idea how I'm ever gonna afford that, or
Yeah.
how go about getting access to funding. And that's where they've contracted with you to step in to help it with identify that for people and walk them through that process.
Yeah. And point out the hard things of finding the grants and knowing
Yeah.
what they should apply for. I mean, the fact that they are taking their resources and giving their people access to me to be able to do that with
Mhm,
them just speaks
mhm.
volumes about them actually, them putting their money where their mouth is. Like they say
Yeah.
they care about kids, they say that, and they're actually doing it. And I don't know many companies that do that. Um,
Yeah.
so to see it actually happening to me is an exciting shift in the whole industry side of
Mhm,
disability. People are, or medically complex, people are starting to see like, hey, kids need these things. Let's find
mhm.
a way. Let's bypass insurance when it's a no, or they don't fund those things, or they won't fund that kind, or let's give them what they need. So yeah, it's exciting for me for sure.
Yeah. And I agree completely. And I'm excited too for people to have that access to you. So if they want to get more involved with you, or let's kind of go down two different paths. If they're interested in the Levity, they're watching this and they're like, oh, I saw you in connection with that. How do they get in contact with you in regards to that specific?
So they can just go to Levity,
Okay.
and once they work out what they're doing with their sales rep, get their demo or whatnot, then
Hmm.
they will put them. Levity will directly put them in
Got
contact
you.
with me. Now, if they don't know where to find the Levity, they are welcome to reach out to me on Instant. I will just send them to the website. They can set up their time. So either way, they'll get there. But
Hmm.
if you're wanting the Levity, go
Hmm.
to Levity, and they will connect you with me. Um,
Awesome.
yeah.
Great. And then if parents who are watching this are just wanting more information about grants, kind of like in a beginning stages, or looking for more support, where do they go to get in contact with you for that?
Yeah, so you're always welcome to hit me in my DMs on Instagram. That does become a little bit busier of a place, though.
Hmm.
The best and most efficient way is to go to my website, advocacyabby.com, just www.advocacyabby.com. And you can work with me in multiple different ways. If, like, you're a corporation, they can consult me, but then there's individual one on one coaching, which I offer. And there's
Hmm.
also a course where kind of what we've been talking about, like how to's. I go in deep depth from how to um, how to navigate your existing insurance and or Medicaid, things that you might not be covered that you could, all the way to how to apply for the grant successfully and how to
Hmm.
follow up and how to find the right grants, all of those things. And so that's more of a broad general course that will teach you like how to fish, so to speak, from
Hmm.
now until ever, until your
Yeah.
child doesn't need these things anymore. And then the one-on-one coaching is when you need all those things. Plus you're like, just show me which grants to apply for. And
Yeah.
you kind of get both. And so I think the fastest way to learn is to do the course. The more focused, narrow, like I need this now, is one-on-one coaching.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Abby, for being here and just sharing your experience. It's, I think, such a, at least for me, new avenue to explore that I wouldn't have even considered until I was a part of a broader conversation. So I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of just give us a basic overview. I like to call it kind of a beginner's guide of just like, this is kind of the basics. And then if you want more information, then you can connect with Abby to get that information.